Okay, great. So again, welcome to our Spring Body and Soul webinar, and I am so very thrilled to welcome Penelope Jagessar Chaffer as our guest expert. I've been working with Penelope a lot over the past few months, which has just been an amazing pleasure. She has a long list of accomplishments and knowledge. She's the award-winning filmmaker of Toxic Baby, which is a really cool blend of music, animation, and science that tells the story about our children's exposure to thousands of chemicals in their daily lives. She's also an author for Toxipedia, which is an online toxicology encyclopedia that offers articles about toxic chemicals, health conditions, regulations, and other things like that. Finally, Penelope is the creator of the Clean Birth Initiative, which advocates for a less toxic birthing environment. And she was featured as an expert in the breastfeeding products category of our baby non-toxic shopping guide that just came out last month. And she was featured as a Women's Voices for the Earth Inspirational Woman last month as well. So thrilled to have Penelope on. And just briefly, for those of you who might be new to Women's Voices for the Earth, I just want to tell you a little bit about what we do. You can see our mission statement there on the slides. And we were really born out of this idea that women have a tremendous amount of social, political, and economic power to change the systems that allow toxic chemicals in our products in the first place. And the reasons that we want to change those systems is because we believe that everybody should have access to safe products. Things you pick up off the shelf should just be safe. It's great that there are green lines out there, but not everybody can afford the latest non-toxic product, right? And you shouldn't have to have a PhD to know what's safe and what's not. And so we kind of come at this issue from three angles. The first one is we educate and engage women, and that means that we are doing things like this. We are giving you new resources. We are giving you solutions to some problems of how to reduce your exposure. We are giving you tools to raise your voice and engage your community in this and spread the word. We work with companies on actually reformulating products. Right now we're targeting Tampax and Always to actually list ingredients and get rid of toxic chemicals in pads and tampons. Just last year we convinced Tide to get rid of a cancer-causing chemical. So that's a quick way to get toxic chemicals out of products. And lastly, we work on legislation, which, as we all know, is a little bit longer process. But the idea is to actually increase our chemical policy regulations so that toxic chemicals don't end up in products in the first place. So that's a bit about what we do. And the question, why a women's organization? There are a lot of reasons why women are more impacted by toxic chemicals than are men. Here are just a few. We're greater users of products that tend to contain toxic chemicals, like personal care products. On average, women use 10 to 15 personal care products a day, whereas men only use 9. Even though gender roles have changed over time, studies show that women are still doing over 70% of the housework in the average home, and that means that we're more exposed to toxic chemicals in cleaning products. Unfortunately, we just have a higher percentage of fat tissue than men, and toxic chemicals, a lot of chemicals that we tend to be concerned about, build up in fat. There's the obvious one. We are the first environment for the next generation, and we can pass toxic chemicals on to our children in the womb and through breastfeeding. I'm not going to dwell on that one. We'll hear a lot about it. There are a lot of unique occupational exposures to women working in the nation's salons, women who clean for a living, massage therapists. Women, and as I said, we have so much power to actually make change here, and we're seeing it happen on, I would say, a massive scale. And so that is just a little bit of background for you, and with that, I am going to turn it over to Penelope. So there are some videos that we are going to watch here, and that sound will come through your computer. So if you are in front of your computer, turn up the audio. That is the one piece of audio that will actually come through your computer. So take it away, Penelope.
What a great introduction. Thank you so much, Cassidy, and I'm really, really thrilled to be able to talk with all of you lovely ladies tonight. I was saying to Cassidy earlier, it's the first time that I've actually had the opportunity to talk specifically about the pregnancy component of Toxic Baby. I became inspired and I started on this journey just about 10 years ago when I was pregnant with my son. And I didn't know not even a quarter of what I know now, but I knew enough to think, oh my God, this was something that I really needed to explore further. And of course, the more I explored it, the more horrified I became. But I also found out that there were lots of things that we could do. And so I felt really motivated to make Toxic Baby. And as I said, the pregnancy component of it is hugely important. So for the first time, I'm showing a lot of the clips, several of the clips that deal specifically with pregnancy and things that happen during pregnancy, which makes the embryo and the fetus and the child to be really vulnerable to toxic chemical exposure. So I want to start off with the opening scene from the film. And I created the scene because I kept thinking, my baby's exposed to chemicals while he's in my stomach, while I'm carrying him. And if my baby could talk to me, what would he say? And that was the sort of motivation that kept going through my mind. So I'm going to play you the opening scene. I'm going to talk a little bit over it, but I'm just going to let it run a little bit as well. When we first conceive our children, we don't know that we've conceived our children. And all sorts of really magical things happen at the point of conception. One of the things that the body starts doing is it starts breaking down the fat stores that are available so that it can fuel the incredible growth changes that are happening. All of these changes, actually every single one, is generated by hormonal exposure.
Some artificial nuts and some FNOA. Help me.
So this is what, for me, I was just thinking, my God, that's what my child would say to me. I'm being exposed to chemicals. And for a long time, medical experts assumed that the placenta was an absolute barrier for anything toxic, anything that might hurt the baby. The placenta is one of the most phenomenal things ever created in the history of mankind. I mean, it really is a stupendous piece of bioengineering. It acts as a heart-lung machine. It does have the capacity to filter out the baby's waste. Without it, the baby wouldn't live. But the placenta is not some kind of toxic, what's the word, netting. It's not going to scoop up all the things that's circulating through us and make sure that it doesn't get to the baby. That thinking is really new in the greater scheme of things. Women have been birthing for millions of years, but it's only recently that we've really begun to understand how the placenta just really is not being created to deal with this sort of thing. The next clip I want to play for you is Professor Tyrone Hayes, and he is a frog specialist. He's really well known. He's the guy that I did my TED Talk with, the Toxic Baby TED Talk. And he talks about his frogs being exposed, his tadpoles being exposed, and he leads us into this whole sort of concept of the placenta. And I put together a little animation to try and help people, particularly dads, and other people who may not quite understand this sort of thing, how hard it is for the placenta to kind of understand what these toxic chemicals are. So that's going to be the next clip that I'm going to play. Okay. Sorry, I didn't realize there's actually a little bit of a delay, so I'll make sure I know that for the next one. So I'm going to play this now.
I tell people all the time, my frogs are aquatic. And the reason that atrazine, I think, is so potent on them is because they're going through developmental processes where they need the right hormone imbalance. And now you've put something in there that's interfering with all of these complex things that have to happen. But I remind people all the time that we all start out as aquatic organisms. We're not swimming around in water, right? But in the mother's womb, you're basically an aquatic organism. And in the same way that a group of fish or a group of my tadpoles might be trapped in a contaminated environment, in much the same way, the fetus is really trapped in a contaminated environment, in part because the placenta is designed to keep out bad molecules. But again, we're inventing molecules that the placenta's never seen before.
placenta control? What is it?
Okay, so we now know that chemicals can pass through the placenta, pass over the placenta. They're now circulating in the baby. And I just wanted to spend a little bit of time just sort of exploring that. We're going to talk quite a bit about things that we can do and solutions and great tips, but really to sort of make this really clear, because there are a lot of obstetricians here in the United States and around the world that really don't understand this. And I managed to speak to the president of the American Society of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, and it's something that they're struggling with. They're really trying their best to try and get people up to speed, but no one is teaching this. There's not a medical school anywhere in the world that teaches gynecologists or obstetricians or any of the medical community about this issue. So I'm just going to cut now to a Dutch researcher, and the Dutch are far and away further advanced than any other nation. They had a lot of toxicity issues that they had to deal with about 30 years ago. And so they've done a lot of research. And here we're looking at the kind of levels. If you're exposed, what does that mean for your baby? So this is Pieter Sauer. He's Dutch, and he has been researching this issue for about 30 years now.
All these compounds pass the placenta. So they go over during pregnancy to the fetus. Every compound we studied basically goes over the placenta. And it goes over in a way that means that the levels in the mother and in the fetus are basically equal. We found all these compounds back in umbilical cord blood. So the compounds are already before birth in the fetus.
There was a study that came out of Canada that found the exact same thing. So what this basically means is that when we're exposed, our fetuses and embryos are exposed as well in really comparable levels. We're seeing hundreds of chemicals that these studies refer to. The fact is, those were the chemicals that were tested for. It's really expensive to test for toxic chemicals. If they could have tested for a lot more, I am fairly confident in saying that they would find a lot more. So these chemicals are now circulating in our babies' bodies. What does that mean? Now, I'm going to talk a little bit now about a process that a lot of people actually don't know about. And when conception happens, the embryo is set up to become a female, interestingly. It used to be called the default pathway. They don't call it that anymore. But basically what it means is that if there wasn't a genetic intervention, every single embryo would become a girl. And that's why men have nipples. If a gene on the Y chromosome triggers these changes, what would end up being the clitoris develops into a penis. So that embryo at the point of conception has the ability to become male or female. It's not conceived as a boy or conceived as a girl. The process of masculinization happens at a certain point, usually before a woman knows that she's pregnant. And so I have a Scottish researcher, really world-renowned researcher, talking about this process, which is called the masculinization process, how the embryo can go from being heading towards the female pathway to switching over and becoming a boy.
When the fetus is developing, irrespective of whether it's going to become a male or a female, it has bitotential, so it can become either. Most people don't realize that when babies start out, they don't start out as a male. The fetus, the baby, can become either a male or a female. we would all become females in the womb unless there's an intervention, and you don't make that switch until about 6 weeks of pregnancy. And so in a male, the Y chromosome carries a gene which switches the gonad into a testis, and that sort of sets a cascade in train that will lead to you becoming a male, a process that we call masculinization.
And so, what happens when this process is interrupted?
Like any process where you have to, if you like, intervene and make a change, then obviously things can go wrong, or it could be that the process is not perfect. And probably as a result of that, then we see that there is a very high incidence of masculinization disorders. Now, not of the sort that are sort of in your face, so not intersex, which is still relatively rare. It can occur, even complete sex reversal. But minor malformations of the masculinization process, they are extremely common, and it's those disorders that I'm particularly interested in, and how they can arise, and what factors may increase the chance of a pregnant woman giving birth to a baby who will have those disorders.
So, the thing about the masculinization process is it's driven by hormones. As I said, every single developmental stage of pregnancy is driven by hormonal activity. You can understand then how exposure to chemical compounds that causes the body to think that it's behaving like a particular hormone could pose a problem. Now, my theory in why boys seem to be so susceptible to so many conditions like autism, asthma, things like cystic fibrosis, they're far more likely to develop leukemia, for example, is because of this vulnerability that happens during the masculinization process. If something comes in at that point, it could basically set up changes that affect the way that that baby will go on to develop as an adult. So a lot of the diseases that we see in adulthood have their origins in fetal life. For those of you who are into that kind of thing, it's called the Barker's hypothesis. And it became quite clear that things were happening in utero that would only show up 20 years later, 30 years later, even 40 years later, which is one of the reasons why the situation with toxic chemicals has gone on for so long. It's really hard to show that direct link because we weren't talking about you have an exposure now and then the mom can feel something in her stomach and we know what's going on. The next clip that I want to play is a pediatric urologist from Seattle Children's Hospital. He's one of the best pediatric urologists in the country. His name is Richard Grady. And he's talking about how he became aware of how phthalates, which are a group of toxic chemicals, could possibly interfere with fetal development. We'll talk a little bit more about phthalates in a minute because they're one of these weird chemicals that they're plasticizers, they're found in vinyl and PVC, but they're also used in things like fragrance, and they're one of the makeup compounds. Why would you have a plasticizer in fragrance and body lotion and that kind of thing? And we can talk about that later in a little bit more depth if people are interested. But it's one of those weird things where you would never expect it to be in a product, and it has all sorts of effects that we're really only now finding out. So let's hear from Richard and hear what he has to say about that.
As I was delving this idea or this concept of environmental exposures and hypospadias, then I became aware of the phthalate issue. There were a number of animal studies looking at phthalates that suggested that they, at least in animals, impaired their testicular function in the short term. And there were some studies that suggested that in rodents that would actually, if mothers were exposed to it, then the offspring showed significant effects.
The mother shows significant effects. I'm sorry, it seems to have been cut out a little bit. So I'm going to show you now some of these effects on rats that we see when the mother is exposed to phthalates. The mother seems fine. the pups are born, and then when the pups are born, we see these kinds of effects. The way that the penis has developed is abnormal. So he was talking about a particular condition called hypospadias, where the tip of where the urethral opening, which is where a boy, what a male would urinate through, is not actually on the tip of the penis where you would expect it to be. It's on the shaft of the penis. In extreme cases, it can be at the base of the penis. That requires reconstructive surgery, and it's one of that with another condition called cryptorchidism, where the testes are not present at birth. They haven't descended into the scrotal sac, either one or both of them. Those two conditions are the number one birth defects for either sex. They've risen by over 100% in the past couple of decades. And that's one of the best examples that we now see for the science of how toxic chemicals can go into the mother and can affect the development of the baby. Now, just in case we were thinking it's only boys, of course, girls can be affected by this as well. The next example I want to play for you guys is talking about a chemical called DES, diethyl stilbestrol, which is actually a pharmaceutical chemical. It was a chemical that was administered as a drug. Sadly ironically, that it was administered to help prevent miscarriage, even though there was no scientific literature whatsoever to support this. The pharmaceutical company involved decided that if a woman might miscarry, and she seems to have a bit of a lethargic pregnancy and it doesn't seem to be going that well, we'll just give her really high doses of estrogen. Diethyl stilbestrol was the estrogen that they gave to mothers. And so I'm going to show you a little bit about just a quick slide, that moving slide that just shows a little bit about DES, and then we'll talk a little bit more about it afterwards. So as you can see, it's a synthetic estrogen used in hormone therapy given to pregnant mothers. It's still used as a breast and prostate cancer drug. It resulted in vaginal and cervical cancers, uterine abnormalities in the daughters of mothers who were given DES. So basically what happened was the mothers were administered this. When the babies were born, they looked absolutely fine. There didn't seem to be any kind of problem with the baby. But a really horrible thing started happening, and they found out that women were developing these really rare forms of cancer that affected the sexual organs, the vagina, uterus, cervical cancers. And boys were now seeing that with prostate cancer. And it was actually the first example that people realized that, oh my God, if you give a mother a drug during pregnancy, it could affect her baby. The interesting thing about DES is that we're now seeing effects in granddaughters, which leads us to this very new science, which is the science of epigenetics, which shows that if you expose a mother to certain things within her environment, toxic chemicals being the primary pathway for toxicity, that these chemicals can have the ability to switch on gene expression that doesn't actually switch off. So basically what happens is that these genes get switched on. The baby is born with these switched on genes. The baby can potentially develop this disease or disorder. But because those genes are switched on, it travels to the next generation, and that generation carries the switched on genes. And their researchers, particularly in the University of Washington, they did some great epigenetic studies, and in rat studies they're seeing 5 generations being affected. That sounds really scary and really awful. We're done with all the really scary, awful parts of this. The great news about this is that if we can find a way of taking those environmental triggers away, it means that we can switch the genes back off. And what that means is that diseases that we didn't really understand or we didn't think we had any cures for, potentially this is how we get rid of them. So it's actually, once you get past all of the really overwhelming, horrific stuff, it's a great position to end up in, because it goes, okay, if we can go back and we can protect mothers from these exposures, then what it means is that potentially what we're doing is decimating the rates of these diseases. Now, we talk a lot about, oh, well, if I didn't know about this when I was pregnant, or I didn't know about this when I was having my first child, I'm now pregnant with my second or third child, etc., etc., what does that mean? Well, a lot of these things are triggered by ongoing environmental exposures, which is why twins can carry the same genetic material, and yet one twin will develop a disease and not the other. So please don't feel like, oh my God, this is really overwhelming and there's no hope or anything like that. It really is about having the information and taking the steps to prevent these exposures in the first place. So the next little animated slide that I want to show you is a study that shows how researchers, this one was done by Shauna Swan, who's actually here in New York at Mount Sinai, and she's she's one of the best phthalate researchers in the world. She did this study. I'm going to pull the study up now. Oh, no, I'm really sorry. Okay, so this is I'm just going to pause this for a minute. We can switch this around. I'm going to go back to the next. This should be this one. I'm going to press play. I can't see what it is when I press. Okay, so pregnant women with high phthalate levels are more likely to have boys with smaller penises and a shorter distance from their anus to their penis, the anogenital distance, or the AGD. Now, that might seem like a really trivial thing. Apparently for men it's not. It's actually the number one reason why they get really worked up with this issue, I found, when they see the film. It's the one thing that really gets them, the idea that their sons might have smaller penises, which seems really trivial. However, what these two things indicate is that there's a disruption to a boy's sperm production. There's a disruption to the way that the male genitals are developing. It is potentially a risk factor for prostate cancer. It's potentially a risk factor for testicular germ cell cancer. So if you're a pregnant woman with lower phthalate levels, you are less likely to have boys who are showing these physical manifestations. Now, they're really good indicators because we can see them. Something like sperm count, we can't see. We can't tell. A gene expressed for prostate cancer, we can't see. But if you have a shorter AGD, then that's an indication that perhaps maybe there is some disruption there, and you might want to make sure that your boys stay away from phthalates as they grow up. So again, this is something that we can see and we can do something about it. I want to go back to the slide before, because this is something that really upsets me. These studies have been going on for quite some time now. There are quite a few, and often in Twitter parties, some of you on this call know that I talk about this all the time. It talks about pesticide exposure and pregnant women. So I'm just going to run this. This is a study that was done in France. A child has about twice the risk of developing acute leukemia or non-Hodgkin lymphoma if his or her mother used insecticides in the home while pregnant. Now, twice the risk is a significant elevated risk, and I just don't understand why pregnant women are not told this. I mean, the studies from France, we have studies from Brazil, we have several studies now from around the world, scientific literature that's cited in America and really prestigious American journals about this. Pregnant women should not have anything to do with pesticides. They're one of the group of most potent, most toxic chemicals that we can be exposed to. So this is, again, studies that show us that there are things that we can be doing. And, the rates of childhood cancer, particularly these two cancers, have been rising significantly. This is something that all pregnant moms should know about. So that leads us on to the kind of things that we really can be doing while we're pregnant to just really try and make sure that our children are not being, our unborn children are not being exposed to things that could cause them harm. I'm just flicking through my slides here.
Let me just try that, Penelope. Oh, there we go. Good.
There we go. Sorry, I somehow I ended up on the wrong one, but we're back now. So, tips for a less toxic pregnancy. The first thing that I want to say is that these are things that it's really good to carry through the rest of your child's life and your life. You know, as a mom, you might want to have more children, and if you're of childbearing age, it's really helpful to think of yourself as kind of like ready to have a baby at any point in time, kind of thing. It can be a burden on women to think of themselves in that way, but I think it's really important. So these tips here, you know, as I was saying, avoid pesticides at all costs. Number one for that is by eating organically. A great study out of California shows that eating a 75% organic diet reduced pesticide exposures, organophosphate pesticide exposures levels to almost indetectable. That's a great thing to know about. And people say, well, what if I can't go all organic? Meat and dairy are prime sources for pesticides because they stay within the fat. As Cassidy was saying, why women are more predisposed to these sort of exposures. Pest control in the home, but also outside. It's another really good study that I didn't put the slide up for that because I didn't want too many slides, but that showed that whether it's outside or inside, it really doesn't matter. And they're not seeing that much of a difference, whether it's herbicides or insecticides or fungicides. You know, atrazine, for example, is a really potent herbicide. It's killing broadleaf weeds, but it is as potent as chloropyrifos, which would kill actual insects. You want to just really stay away from as much pesticide exposure as well. And I remembered to put in that flea and tick collars if your animals, your pets at home also could potentially be a source of pesticides as well. I have a Dutch researcher. She's amazing. She was the first Dutch professor ever. She looks like she's something out of Lord of the Rings. She really looks like this ancient wise wisdom woman, and she's in the film. And she talks about how she started advising her Dutch women who were preparing to have babies decades ago to really cut back on their personal care products, the makeup that they were using, skincare preparations, that kind of thing. And I was just astounded by the fact that she was actually saying this, you know, decades ago. That's phenomenal. I wish I had known that kind of information when I myself was pregnant. You know, our bodies change a lot when we're having babies, and sometimes we start thinking, oh, we need to do this. I've had women say to me, well, that's the time when I want to use that breast firming cream because my breasts are going to grow, and I want them to stay really firm. And there's no judgment here. People do the things that they do because they think it's the right thing for them to do. My advice would be really cut back on stuff that's really not necessarily. For a lot of us, it's to do with our work. You know, we have to present ourselves in a certain way. What is it that we can cut back on? If there's one thing, I would say lipstick. Lipstick has the really weird distinction of also having lead thrown into the mix, which is not something that there's still a potential for lead in other makeup items, but we're not ingesting them. And of course, you know, we bite our lips and we lick our lips and we can ingest it. So if there's one thing that you do ditch, it's lipstick. Hair products and hair care rituals and things that we do for our hair, again, is a huge potential exposure risk because we can use so many different products. And we have all sorts of weird things hiding in there, like phthalates, that you wouldn't expect to find there as well. And that leads us into things like perfume. Really, this would be the time to not wear regular perfume. Not only is there the concept of phthalates, there are the fragrance chemicals, the artificial musks, and other synthetic smells that are used, really potent chemical cocktails that can really affect the fetus, what we're bringing into the home to scent the home as well. And it's, for some people, a real departure because we're going off into this sort of like natural, for some people really crunchy place. Let's live there while we're pregnant. It's not that much of a sacrifice, really. It's not something that we need. The nursery, just there are a lot of really great resources for nurseries out there, so I don't really want to talk too much about that. But people often don't talk about the fact that when you're doing work to your home because you're preparing your nursery for your baby, it's really best to not even be present, even if you're using zero VOC paint in really, really clean products. You know, the person painting might have to sand down walls a little bit or might have to do a little bit of drilling. You don't know what's behind those coats of paint. You don't know the building materials that's being used that can throw things out into the environment. So in an ideal world, that would be a great time to go and visit your sister, or, you know, go away with some friends, or, you know, maybe have the work done during a work trip or something like that, if it's at all possible. And again, if you're purchasing items for your nursery or things for the home while you're pregnant, try and let them off gas. So try and let them release their toxic chemicals that come about when something is unwrapped and is brought into its place of use for the first time. Try and let that happen outside of the home, a garage, for example, or try and get someone to store it for you. Your parents or a friend, or worst case scenario, stick it outside during the day, let it air out, and if you have to bring it in, try and, you know, shove it into a cupboard if at all possible. Again, we shouldn't have to be doing all of this, but if you can do that, that's a really good way of minimizing your exposure. The other thing, so I want to whiz through really quickly because I don't know how many questions people would have, and I would love to hear what you have to say and what you're thinking, and if there's anything that I can help clarify. I just want to talk about birth and getting ready for birth, because we get really excited about, well, some of us get really excited about pregnancy, and then we get really excited about looking forward to meeting our baby, which of course is the whole purpose of the exercise. But we kind of forget about the birth aspect, and birth can actually be really toxic, particularly here in the United States. So we're getting ready to prepare for birth. Well, even if you're having a home birth and you're preparing for a natural birth, you're advised to pack a hospital bag. And potentially there are lots of things in your hospital bag that can be really toxic. Now, think about your baby's birth, your baby's first moments in your arms. You know, they're born, it's their first time in this world, and they can be exposed to horrendous amounts of chemicals that, you know, you bring them home and you create this nice green environment for them, but while they're in hospital or in a birthing unit, they can be really exposed. And some of those exposures are going to come through your hospital bag, the things that you're carrying, your sanitary towels. Nobody ever told me. I had no idea that it was even possible to go through sanitary towels the way that you go through them once you've had a baby. And of course, the Women's Voices for the Earth have a great campaign that they're running right now about that. Organic, you know, cotton at the very least is what we're talking about, so that we're not being exposed to those chemicals, which of course, if you're breastfeeding, will eventually filter its way through. The stuff that you're going to wear during your birth, some of these chemicals, depending on the length of your labor, will have the ability to get into the bloodstream and circulate to the baby while the baby is going through the process of being born, while it's going through the laboring process. So, you know, you want to rush out and buy a brand new nightie and you get some great piece of polyester or some other man-made fiber that's been treated with flame retardants, because of course polyester is highly flammable. And you know, you're in pre-labor, and you know, you're not quite there, but it's a day and you're wearing this stuff, and again, that's something that your baby could really well do without, if at all possible. Pillowcases and ideally bed linens, and you might get some raised questions about raised eyebrows, and like, you want your own linen, and if you can do it, you really should, because again, you don't know what your linens are being washed in, that are being used in hospital. You're breathing it in. If you have your baby close to you, again, your baby's going to come into bed and will be breathing in stuff that's been washed in with ammonia and chlorine and all sorts of things. scented chemicals as well. So when you're doing your hospital tours and you're talking and making choices about where you're going to birth your baby, it's something to bring up. Will I be able to bring in my own linens? Again, going back to our toiletries and our the stuff that we're using during pregnancy, your hospital probably is not even thinking about things like less toxic toothpaste and that sort of thing. And snacks, it's really important to keep yourself, keep your nutritional uptake during labor. We'll talk a little bit about the laboring process and potential toxicity there as well. But the point is that often we're really prepared for labor and we're really green and we've done the less toxic thing possible, and then our partners go out and grab us some snacks and they've got genetically modified ingredients in them, or they're not necessarily, they're full of additives, preservatives, colorants, that kind of thing. Again, that's going to be digested and it has the potential to pass on to your baby. This is your baby's first appearance in the womb. If you could get secondhand clothing, I think that's the best thing. If you want to buy something special for your baby, really try and get organic cotton, nickel-free, the onesies and the gowns, a towel and a blanket that your baby's going to be swaddled in when your baby comes out. Now the tendency is to not sort of clean the baby off straight away, but if they are, what are you cleaning my baby with? Because the baby's just been born, the skin is so thin. Try and have those conversations and have your birth partner, try and make it part of your birth plan, and try and get your birth partner to really sort of not insist, but insist that we would really love if the baby's when the baby's going to be washed, if this is used. It would be great if actually the first thing you do is bring the baby to mom and not go through the whole washing thing, because as soon as that baby's born, we want the baby with mama. And if you're going to wrap the baby, this is what we would like the baby to be wrapped in. And this is the start of your relationship with your baby. So breastfeeding, not breastfeeding, if you don't plan on breastfeeding, and there are many reasons why women may not or cannot, really think about infant formula. I was horrified to read the ingredients that are used in your baby's first meal. It's just, a lot of them are full of GMO stuff, a lot of soy, a lot of high fructose corn syrup. That is not what you want your baby's first meal to be. And of course, if you are going to breastfeed and bottles and all of that sort of stuff, I talk a little bit about that in the guide that Cassidy was referring to try and give you better options for that. But that should be all part of your bag. Really skimming along here, this is an image of a woman having a typical labor in the United States. A lot of medical intervention, and this is really not the place to have the conversation about whether it's right or wrong or the history of it or anything like that. Suffice to say, those tubes are plastic. The chemicals, the phthalates in particular, that leach from those devices go into your blood, and they're going to go into your baby. And they've actually been able to measure phthalate levels in mothers who've had to go through, who've had to have these medical devices used during their labor, and they can measure them in babies. Now, the most important thing is that our babies are born safe and well, and our mamas are safe and well. If that is the route that you end up having to go down, the miracle of modern medicine is an incredible thing. But a lot of women kind of feel, and they're made to feel like this is actually what labor means for you, lying on your back with a lot of devices and things stuck in and making it as comfortable for you as possible. That's really going to increase your toxicity. So I really wanted to start the Clean Birth Initiative because I was like, it's going to be really toxic, and it starts with a great labor. Let's try and have active labors if we can. And active labor will really help move the baby down, and the process of labor, if it's happening and it's progressing, doctors are less likely to want to intervene. Partners get less concerned. Oh, nothing's happening, and we're getting stressed out, and we need to do something to make this happen. Women know how to birth their babies. Sometimes we need some help, and that's great, but for the vast majority of women who have birthed over the millennia that we've been birthing babies, we know what we need to do. And a lot of that is being upright, walking on a birthing ball, squatting down, moving around, not just kind of like, oh, I'm going into labor and I'm going to lie on my back. That is a recipe for intervention of the sort that we just saw. Keep hydrated, Dehydration and fatigue are really well linked. We know that anyway, but particularly so in labor. And what are you drinking to be hydrated? Again, this is a potential toxicity area. There are natural pain relief options that we can explore instead of thinking, well, I'm just going to have an epidural because I just can't deal with the pain. I had a really long labor. My first labor was really long. It was really intense. But I came out of that labor at one point. I won't even go into it, but at one point it was really touch and go, and they were really worried about the baby, and it was just like suddenly it was going to be something out of ER, and I managed to come through that, and that was one of the most incredible experience of my life. If you can try and birth your babies and find your way through it, even if you're having a cesarean or an epidural or any of these things, finding your way through that process is incredible as a woman. But if you can give yourself tools that is going to help you do that in an empowered way, that's a really awesome thing. I really want to talk a little bit really quickly about water births as an alternative treatment. Dr. Michel Audin, who was the first person to bring water births into hospital, he's now in his mid-90s. He's still going strong. He's a phenomena. He's in the film, and I've had the opportunity to speak to him over the years. A wonderful guy. But he talks about how water has this amazing ability to be able to release endorphins and block some of the neurons transmitting pain up to the brain. And a lot of our medical interventions is to do with pain and the idea that we can't deal with it, we don't know how to deal with it. So really explore those options because, this is a really significant part of the toxicological equation when we think about pregnancy, but we often don't think about when we think about pregnancy. Rest and relax. In the run-up to having my babies, I had this, I don't know what it's called, Cassidy, the nesting instinct, I think it is, and you run around like crazy, and you have all of this energy, and you're getting your home ready, and it's fantastic, and you feel like Superwoman. Really try and relax and get some rest in, because you don't know how long your labor is going to be, and you really want to save all of that energy for taking you through that, because again, a lot of intervention comes about because you are exhausted. And I want to mention just really quickly things like acupuncture and reflexology during pregnancy. This is not actually at the time of birth, although some people are allowed to do that. They're allowed to have that in hospital or at home. Basically, if you consider doing that during your pregnancy, there are studies that show that you tend to have quicker, faster, your labors are more easily managed by the laboring mother. So again, I just wanted to put that out there because for a lot of women in the United States, it's not something that they necessarily hear a lot of, although doulas and midwives do talk a lot about this, and I wanted to kind of really make sure that we touched on that really quickly. So I think Cassidy, that we're there. I have a couple of other notes, but I just really want to get to people's questions because I'm looking at the time, and I know we started a little bit late, but I really want people to have the opportunity to interact and share and, just let us know what you're thinking and how you're feeling and if you have any questions. So I think that's it for me, although, Cassidy, if I've missed anything, just let me know.
It's amazing. Thank you so much. That was so amazing. I do want to briefly say, as you see on this last slide, that these webinars are free resources. We're an entirely member-driven, foundation-funded nonprofit and would love any donations to keep these going. And, of course, you can do that on our website. So I would love to kick it off. Anne, you wrote in a really great question. I'm going to go ahead and unmute all lines, and then Anne, if you wanted to ask that question, that would be great.
The conference has been unmuted.
And while I did just unmute all your lines, please know that you can certainly unmute. You can mute yourself by pushing *6 if you happen to have a lot of background noise. So, but Anne, are you there?
Yes, hi. And Penelope, you know, I love and appreciate everything you do, and I'm absolutely fascinated with all of this, and you do tremendous work. But a question that just still boggles my mind is, why are medical professionals in the USA so slow to help educate moms about this? As you've noted over and over again,
the scientists know that I got ink on all over my phone.
What was that?
I need a new pen. This ink is...
So whoever's talking about you need a new pen, maybe, do you want to mute yourself by pushing *6? All right, Anne, go ahead.
So the question I was wanting to ask Penelope is if the medical professionals in the USA theoretically have access to the same information, and there are volumes of information and resources that Penelope has put together, why in the world why are medical schools not teaching this? Why is this not standard that medical schools are not sending anybody out the door without this information that is so critical? And why are they not educating mothers even before pregnancy, but at least at the point of pregnancy, about this?
Well, you know, that's a great question, and I'm so glad. And it's so nice to hear your voice, and thank you so much for taking part and being here. And I'm really grateful for all of your support. I saw your tweets earlier as well. That's a great question. And so just a little bit of a quick background on this issue. For a long time, the relationship between the chemical industry, the pharmaceutical industry, the petroleum industry, it's a very tight industry. And when researchers started showing concerns about things, these industries developed really sophisticated, and in some cases not so sophisticated, but for the most part they were really effective campaigns in suppressing the science and labeling the scientists as literally crazy people. And when I started working on this 10 years ago, I was told I was a crazy person. I was told, do not make this film. That will be the end of your career. You're a crazy person. This doesn't exist. And my career took a bit of a hit because people were like, this science isn't real. And I said, look at the science. If you look at the science, why don't I know about this? Because I can read these studies. And that's, of course, the great thing about the Internet. Anyone can go and search these studies now. And I was just like, the information is all out there. And I've been talking to a lot of doctors, and for a long time the medical community they didn't know what to think. They did not believe the researchers. And science is really segregated. So you have toxicologists, you have chemists, you have biologists, you have the doctors, and then within that you have pediatricians, you have oncologists. Everyone does their own thing, and very rarely do they kind of look up and see what else is going on around them. And so when this issue started happening and people started realizing what was going on, it was like, it doesn't just touch one area. It's chemistry, it's biology, it is toxicology, it is pharmacology. I mean, it's all of these disciplines. But the medical community has been really slow, as you say, to respond to this. And culturally, I have to say, in the United States, there is this sort of sense of, well, you can't really prove anything. You have to kind of jump through hoops. Part of that, I think, is because corporations have been allowed to have rights as citizens in the way that does not really happen in other parts of the world. And it's partly cultural, it's partly economic, but these corporations were allowed rights. They were allowed to be protected in ways that they really should not have been. They should have been forced to really show studies, information about what they were producing and how that could affect people, and they were allowed to kind of get away with that because they were never really regulated. And so we're now in a situation where doctors are trying to play catch up, but they weren't taught at medical school, and now they're on the other side of medical school, and they have busy practices, and they're hearing about these things, and they have women who know more about this stuff. I mean, most of us on this call now know more than at least 95% of the obstetricians in the country about this issue. That's ridiculous. I mean, I know more about this than most doctors in the world, and that is a crazy thing. That's not a good thing. I take no pride whatsoever in that. And so, while I was making Toxic Baby, I was like, I've got to get this information out there, and probably be a series of apps. There'll be a series of a lot of other things that I would like to do. But the reason why this is happening is because culturally we are allowing corporations and some individuals within corporations and industries to get away with not really stepping up and testing their stuff and proving that things are safe before bringing them onto the market. And the medical community is caught in the crossfire because they have the pharmaceutical industry on one hand coming to them and saying, look at all these amazing drugs that we have. There's a really close relationship between medicine and pharmacology in the United States. And then you have the patients who really are not being served very well. And that's a rather kind of long-winded response, but hopefully we've touched on enough detail so people understand why that is the way that it is.
Thank you. Thanks for that great question too, Anne.
Yeah, thank you.
Who else has a question or a comment?
I just want to say really quickly, that is why we need to support legislation, because it's not fair on a pregnant woman who is going through the most momentous thing that her body is ever going to do to have to deal with this. It really is just outrageous and disgusting. And the only way that we're going to make this better is that we get culturally to a place where people understand that we need our elected representatives to do the right thing, because not all of us can make these choices and not all of us have access to this information.
Exactly. I second that 100%. Does anybody else have a question or comment?
Don't be shy. I don't bite. Well, if you do have questions later on, I'm sure there's a way. Is there a generic Women's Voices for the Earth?
Yeah, everybody should please feel free to contact me at CassidyR@womensvoices.org.
You can send questions through, and I will endeavor to answer them as well as I can. I know that it really can feel really overwhelming, but hopefully we've talked enough about things that we can do, and this is a great time to actually be doing this, because 10 years ago I personally had much less options, and 15 years ago, and people who were birthing in the 1990s and 1980s, they had less options too. I mean, granted, they had less chemicals to deal with, but that's another story. There are a lot of really great organizations who are seeing gaps in the market and trying to create products for pregnant women that are as safe as possible, and are trying to do the right thing for pregnant women and giving them options. And so, those options are more available than at any other time previously.
And that's a great, Anne, again, tell us everybody about the Toxic Baby app. Is it going to launch? What's going on with it?
Well, thank you, Anne. So to be really honest, and I will be brutally honest with all of you women here, I think we can share honestly in this space. Toxic Baby really suffered to find a wider audience. We've come up against a lot of pressure to change the nature of the film, to take certain scientists out, to not show certain things, to not talk about certain things. And I felt it was really important for this information to be out there. So I struggled really to find the right route, and I thought I would create this app. And I launched a Kickstarter to help fund the app, and it struggled, and we struggled. And so now I'm just really regrouping and trying to work out what's going to be the best way in moving forward. I think that this information needs to get out there it's available, it's done, it's ready to go. And so I'm trying to think outside the box of how I can get it to a device where people can see this, and they can see this stuff, and they can, learn about it, because I think it's ignorance. I mean, nobody willingly does any of this. They do it because they don't know any better.
Father, that's the problem. This is America.
I'm saying,
there's a little background noise there.
Everything.
If you wanted to mute yourself, or if you wanted to ask a question, maybe.
Or share what you're saying. I mean, I'm really interested to hear.
Person to partner with?
Why would you think? Yeah, she could be, but she's also Trinidadian. She sounds to me like something.
Whoever's talking right now, we can certainly hear you. I don't know if you mean to be on mute. If so, go ahead and *6 yourself.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Hello. Hi. My question is about what vitamins are safe, and also about is stevia a safe product as a sugar substitute?
So in terms of vitamins, there are obviously certain vitamins that are suggested that women take. I was surprised to find out that a number, if not, a significant proportion of big name brand vitamins are synthetic vitamins. They are actually derived from petrochemicals. I would not, I'm challenged to recommend those. Definitely talk to your obstetrician. With any kind of advice to pregnant women, you need to speak to your obstetrician first and foremost. But I think that there are really reputable vitamins now on the market that are derived from whole food sources that would be a much better choice for you. In terms of specifics, obviously for things like spina bifida and stuff like that, the B vitamins that you really want to make sure that you're up on, and your obstetrician or your midwife will tell you what those are. One thing that I want to add that no one, again, also talks about is calcium. What happens when you're pregnant is that your body needs a significant, really, really significant amount of calcium, because of course it's laying down the bones for the baby. What happens is that if your calcium levels aren't appropriate, your body will raid your bones for your calcium, which is fine, except excess amounts of lead are stored in our bones, and we all have lead in our bodies because, of course, we've all grown up in a time where lead was widely used in automobiles and in paint and stuff like that. So the lead that we would have been exposed to as children, much of it is stored in our bones. And when our body is looking for those calcium stores because it's not enough, there's not enough bioavailable, it will go into your bones and leach that out. And once it starts leaching calcium, it will leach lead as well. So that's something that, again, I don't really hear mentioned really often, but that's an important thing to be aware of. Again, something to ask your obstetrician about, the right amounts of calcium that you should be taking.
And also about stevia?
Oh, stevia. I will do a little bit of digging. I really try and advocate using things that we know that we feel that are really safe. I've not seen adverse studies for stevia, but then again, stevia is a relatively new product on the market. I feel uncomfortable with recommending it. I will certainly look into it, and if you want to send Cassidy an email, I can, ask around, ask some of my scientists if they've heard anything, what they know about it. I mean, obviously stevia is a plant, and so in theory it doesn't have the same toxicity as obviously something that is synthetic. But I personally don't know of what other compounds might be present in stevia that could potentially pose a problem.
Thank you. And what is that email again to email Cassidy?
Yeah, it's Cassidy R, CASSIDYR @womensvoices.org.
Thank you very much.
Was that Angela? Did you get a chance to ask your question? I see your hand is raised.
That was me.
Great. Okay, great.
Thank you. I'll lower my hand now. Thank you.
And anyone else? Why don't we take one last closer question? Assuming anyone has one. No? Penelope, did you have any closing thoughts that you wanted to share?
I'm just seeing Judith a note. Our Stolen Future by Theo Colburn, Domanowski and Myers is an excellent book on hormone disruptors. Pete Myers is in Toxic Baby. He's a great friend of mine.
That's great.
And an amazing researcher. I think out of all the researchers, he's the one guy that's across everything. Between these 4 virtual walls, I mean, literally, he will get a phone call and Prince Charles needs you to come and talk to him about this issue, and he has to kind of put down his research and kind of go off and do that kind of thing. He's an amazing guy, and he was really at the forefront with Theo. Theo's much older now. She doesn't really do that much, but that book was seminal. It's a really important publication, and it's a really great information. Theo runs the TEDx Exchange, which it's the endocrine disruptor exchange, and they have a lot of really great information as well. And in closing, pregnancy should be a time of great joy. Having a baby is an incredible, wonderful thing, and I'm really sorry that we're having this webinar, as great as it is and as thrilled as I am to be speaking to you guys. It's awful that we're having to talk about this kind of stuff, but I feel that if we embrace this and we know that it's a problem, we do the best that we can, and that's all that we can ever do. But also we share this information with our girlfriends and our community so that they know about this stuff as well. We get to a point where we are able to culturally get to a place where people start talking about this, and that really spurs the changes that need to happen on a state and federal level. And in saying that, there are 2 bills that are currently in Congress. One is coming out of the House and will go to the floor within a week almost, and another one is in the Senate. This is a Congress that, for whatever reason, hasn't really done much, but the fact that there are 2 bills supported by the chemical industry, they're not very good bills. They're going to take the United States even further back than it is at the minute. And where we are is Europe has really strong regulations. This is not about Europe is better than the US. This is not about that at all. But there are certain countries within Europe, like the Netherlands, that were like, there's no way we're going back to where we were. We've seen the effects on our population. And so they forced really strong legislation in. We have American companies sending less toxic products to Europe and selling the original, more toxic products here in the United States because there's better legislation over there. We need to be in a place where our multinationals are selling the same less toxic products wherever you are. And that will only come about as a result of legislation. So, please, if you have the opportunity, reach out to your elected representatives and let them know that you want chemical reform, you want regulation of toxic chemicals, but the bills that currently stand are not going to do any good for our children. They're actually going to take away the state's rights to be able to legislate on this, and we've done some really incredible work because California and Washington and Vermont, New York has a bill coming up next week, and Minnesota has just passed a ban on triclosan. There's some really amazing stuff going on at state level that is driving changes at the federal level because, manufacturers are not going to make one product for Minnesota and one product for everywhere else. But this bill would take away that right, as well as other reasons why it's not particularly good. This is really critical, and potentially it will be a midterm electioneering point. So I just want you guys to be really aware of that, because it's not very often that we get an opportunity for the House and the Senate to talk about this stuff and for our voices to be heard, and now's the time to speak up.
Yeah, and I actually, thank you for reminding me about that, Penelope. I will send a link to the action alert we have on our website right now where you can email your representative about that. I'll email that along with the RSVP recording.
And, for any of you out there who are pregnant, I wish you all the best. It is, my pregnancies really kind of evolved me as a woman. You don't have to go through pregnancy to evolve as a woman, but it is a really wonderful experience. I wish you nothing but the best. I hope it's full of as much light and fun and love as it can be. It can be really challenging too, and I know that side of it as well. But profound thanks for all of you for joining in tonight and sharing your time, which is very precious. And also Cassidy and Women's Voices for the Youth for allowing me the opportunity to share a little bit of what I know with you guys.
And thank you, Penelope, so much for this. I think that it was wonderful, and I learned a lot, which is why I love these webinars. And again, we will have this recording available to you. I will send it out tomorrow or Monday. You can check Penelope out at her Toxic Baby website. She has a blog. You can also follow her on Twitter and on Facebook. So again, thank you all so much for being on, and have a wonderful evening.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Please stand by.